Jubilee Alliance Party nominations are the very same ones who voted for him in the ODM nominations.
Yeah. Well, Ganjo, the laws governing political parties' affairs, how these nominations are conducted, how one can jump ship today, tomorrow they're in another and already in a ticket, they seem at best to be unclear or being flouted left, right, and center.
Yeah, Sophie, I think the reality is that you have a conflict here between political realism and the law. Every party gets into an election to win. And I think ODM is very clear that this is a good candidate. And whatever it takes for them to get this candidate, they're going to try. And that would happen for any political party. You want to get a candidate who can win. The reality is that we have a very dysfunctional political party system. And it is not just in Kajiado. We have seen that when there was ODM nomination challenges in Homa Bay, you know, people defected all over the place and they've offered themselves in new parties, you know, and that sort of indiscipline is actually what the political parties, if you read the political parties act, the spirit of that act was to ensure that these sort of movements across parties where, you know, people no longer join parties because of ideologies, they discipline the parties, that we stop that. And the fact that we haven't managed to do that just means that that's one of the areas in terms of our own political development that a lot needs to be done. The unfortunate thing, by the way, is that we continue to fund these entities called political parties with taxpayers' money, and they are not institutions. They are absolutely not institutions. The reason these institutions were being funded was to grow credible political institutions that would participate in the political process in a credible, institutionalized manner. That is not happening. So it actually now begs the question whether actually we should be paying taxpayers' dollars, taxpayer shillings, to fund entities that are generally individualized entities, you know, entities which have no members because members shift from all over the place. Candidates can shift, candidates have no loyalties to anything. There's massive indiscipline. There's a real question as to whether it makes sense to fund them. We should just leave them like other societies, you know. So there's a big problem, and I think it's a conversation that as a nation we must have about what is the role, what is the importance of political parties, strong political parties with ideologies within our new constitutional framework. I think we're still operating as if we were operating in the old days, whereas the new constitutional arrangement actually expects that we have very strong institutionalized political parties.
And the laws, is it that they're not being taken seriously, or there are no laws protecting political parties or ensuring that, you know, this kind of behavior doesn't happen?
There's several things have happened. If you look at the initial draft of the Political Parties Act, it had very strong provisions that ensured that this sort of jumping ship would be fairly difficult. When that bill went to Parliament, a lot of those were whittled down. So there's a lot of now room for maneuver. There's also a lot of flouting of the rules, you know, so that there's both a combination of regulations that are not very strong, but even those being flouted. And then the register of political parties has not been as strong as it should be in terms of ensuring discipline on those parties. And part of it is what I said is political realities. Do you want to pick up fights with the ruling political parties? I'm not sure you want to. As a register of political parties, your office is not an independent, protected office. You're at the mercy of political parties. So those are some of the realities we're having to live with.
Marco Dingo, we saw JAP, we get very excited saying, you know, Kajiado Central has presented an opportunity for TNA, URP and other parties to come together. But now, from this story covered in one of the dailies today, we are seeing that they could be knocked out of a technicality because of the timelines. So is it that it wasn't well thought through, this whole JAP party, JAP, which is Jubilee Alliance Party, and having one candidate going through that ticket?
I'm sure the people who designed JAP, I'm not privy to the details, thought through it, and it has quite some considerable political support from the party hierarchy. I think what is happening in Kajiado is unfortunate, I think, in terms of the timelines. We've been talking about JAP now for nearly 2 weeks. This name change should have been ratified much earlier. The submission should have been made much earlier. Those are careless mistakes we can't afford to make, especially when you are in a ruling coalition. But you remember that all these people who contested on JAP switched from TNA a couple of days, just a couple of days before. Yeah, they resigned from TNA. I remember this happened less than 10 days ago, in fact. Yeah, they crossed over to JAP and contested on JAP. So I don't see the difficulty in Tutui switching back to TNA if there are problems with JAP. And like Kamudo was saying, I think the registrar has done us a lot of disservice, in fact. Because if the law was followed, even as whittled down as it is, neither JAP nor ODM would have a candidate. Because the ODM candidate is now a former JAP candidate, and before then, a TNA candidate. He switched parties 3 times in the course of 2 weeks. Yeah, the JAP candidate was a member of TNA just a couple of days before. I don't think this is acceptable. But then I think we started on a false note, just right from the 2013 general elections. A lot of members of parliament, quite a number of members of parliament, a governor, at least a governor, the governor of Migori, switched parties a couple of days to submission of the nomination. In fact, on the day nomination papers were submitted, the senator from Mombasa switched parties after he'd been defeated in an ODM nomination. A couple of these. So we allowed this to happen in 2013, and that is the point we should have corrected a lot of these things. And Ms. Ndungu is still sitting in office, holding brief for an office she's not handling properly.
But CIC, we saw you yesterday put out a notice on the dailies over the conduct of members either of parliament or public leaders. Why haven't you taken any action over this as well, seeing you coming out strongly to address this issue and say, hey, this is wrong, we need to go back to the law and stick to it?
I'll tell you what, one of the things we are very clear as an institution is that we're also very careful. 2 things. One, we're very aware that our term comes to an end in another 10 months. We don't want to appear like the prefects of the Constitution. There are institutions that are supposed to be, between the IEBC and the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, I can tell you we have had numerous discussions on this point, a lot of correspondence. We would like as much as possible for these institutions to actually take charge and deal with the issues, because ultimately they're going to remain. They're going to remain once we move out. If we take on the responsibility of resolving issues, then what happens in December when we move out and those institutions are supposed to take charge? The reality is that on the issue we raised yesterday, it's also that the trend now has become that it is now accepted that it is okay for political leaders to misbehave in public. And as long as they forgive one another, it's all right. What we forget is that we are building a culture of intolerance, a culture of public brawls between leaders. And what is that doing to the credibility of the leadership in this country? What are we doing to the faith that Kenyans are supposed to have in leadership, and therefore in the decisions that they make? Because ultimately Kenyans are supposed to have those respect in those decisions. If people have no respect in Parliament, in the National Assembly, and that National Assembly is the one that makes laws, do you expect the same Kenyans to respect those laws? So it's a big problem, and we're worried that the way we're going very, very fast down the drain, that we could have a very indisciplined nation in terms of our respect for the rule of law and our respect for constitutionalism. On the issue of the political parties, I think it's also getting out of hand, and I think there will come a time where if we feel that the institutions that are responsible are not doing what they need to do, we may do what within a limited mandate we would be able to do. But ultimately, I think, Sophia, we need to hold institutions which have specific mandates on issues to account. So that because that is where they earn the shillings they have. That is why they hold those positions. And if they cannot carry out their mandate, it's time to say goodbye to the nation. It's actually very unfortunate that in all the areas that we're talking about significant challenges, the Constitution created institutions. The Constitution created institutions, and sometimes the failure of those institutions is some of the consequences we are seeing in a disciplined political system and in a disciplined leadership and integrity sector.
Okay, Sifuna, let me bring you in on leaders behaving badly, because Katari went to the EACC Day 2 yesterday. But you mentioned you actually do not think he was behaving badly.
It's ridiculous. First of all, let me just say that if you ask the average Kenyan, they have very low expectation of members of parliament. If you ask any Kenyan what kind of sort of respect they have for the members of the house, it's very low. This behavior is expected, and it is because these people are not drawn from another planet. They come from amongst us. This is the behavior that we condone. This is behavior that we actually engage ourselves in. As far as Kiteri is concerned, I think the only thing that I would object to his conduct at the Weighbridge is the choice of words, because he used a fairly colorful language. But the truth of the matter is that there's not one single Kenyan who can say they've never walked into a government office and never felt like using some, flowery language. And we're all name droppers. We get into a little jam. We will tell everyone who our friends are. Yeah. If I am in a jam, I will call all my friends, and all my friends will just happen to be lawyers. These are the people that I hang out with. So if he hangs out with the president, and we have seen it is actually something we have on video, that you can call the president and put him on speaker, and he will solve a problem that you are in.
If you're Sonko.
Yeah, so State House cannot pretend that things like those don't happen, that Keter cannot call them, and that they cannot get people out of jams. These are your friends. These are people you, the stories, they were actually having a drink with some of these people. So why would you not call them when you're in a jam?
So what becomes the fate of Chapter 6, Makodingo? Because many imagined, as the statement that was put out by CIC, is that by the action that was taken against Baraza, the former DCJ, the things will be changed. It will be a high threshold for these leaders, but that has slowly just been degenerating, and now to this kind of action we're seeing.
I think Chapter 6 was extremely ambitious. Given the circumstances, the political circumstances we have in the country. A country is allowed, people are allowed to be ambitious in terms of the conduct they want of their leaders. I wish we could do more in terms of holding our leaders accountable, and I think CIC gave a list of leaders who have behaved badly, you know. And for me, it culminated not with Keter, but with what happened in Parliament during the Security Laws Amendment Act. I mean, members of Parliament were stripping naked in the House. Yeah, people were pouring water on the Speaker. And this one is a member of the Parliamentary Service Commission. They were literally uprooting, removing microphones. And you are responsible for maintaining those microphones, a member of the Parliamentary Service Commission. I'm hoping that we will start to take action. I know the judiciary took action. A lot of people thought that it was fairly harsh on the DCJ, but it was expected. I mean, holding the office she had, we had expectations of that office. So I think for her, it was expected. We have to put some discipline in Parliament, in our members of Parliament. And I'm hoping the Parliamentary Service Commission will actually do something when they resume. Kick that member out of the Parliamentary Service Commission and take some disciplinary, concrete. Gladys Wanga, she's a member of the Parliamentary Service Commission, and she was the one pouring water on the Deputy Speaker. It's unacceptable. I mean, the position she holds is unacceptable. That kind of behavior could actually be tolerated. Let Parliament take action, beginning with those people who are behaving badly. And I'm assuming it's fairly a huge number of the members of Parliament from both sides.
Across the board,
From across board. But even with the Keter case, I'm pretty sure that if we had, the full video of what transpired in that office, maybe we'll be baying for the blood of, the people who work at the weighbridge. But nevertheless, his behavior is unacceptable. It's unbecoming of a public officer. We only have 349 members of Parliament. We expect better from them. If we are going to be sorting our differences the way he did with all those, even called Kenyans names, for me, I think that was really where he crossed the line. But before we take action on him, let's take action on people like Moses Kuria. I mean, he said an entire community should be uprooted from the nation for, keeping certain parts of their body. It's unacceptable that we let this thing slide day in, day out. We get a new one, we move into a new scandal, and we forget the previous one.
Talk about it for a while, forget about it.
Yeah, we talk about it for a day, actually. Tomorrow something else will come up, we'll talk about it, and we forget, and it becomes acceptable behavior for us, forgetting that we have a Chapter 6 that requires certain basic minimums from our public officers. I think it's something that's true.
And in fact, Sophia, I was going to say, when you read Chapter 6, it actually does not address itself to all public officers. It actually addresses itself to state officers, a certain cadre of officers, those people who hold significantly high positions in the public service. And that is because those people actually define the sort of culture, the political culture that we are eventually going to have. If we have a very indisciplined lot at the top, the reality is that seeps to the bottom. Number two, if we start to act like the Constitution doesn't really matter, it's just an exhortation, it is something we aspire to, but in reality, everybody knows we can't get there. What about the rest of the Constitution? Why leave it at Chapter 6? Maybe even Chapter 12 on public finance, we don't need to respect. Maybe even judicial chapter. And the reality is that the standards that were set, the Nancy Baraza standard, was very, very important in terms of building faith in a new constitutional dispensation. And I think it's important that for public officers, state officers, we continue to hold people to that standard. Is it going to take a day? No. Is it going to take a month? Yes. But it can't be that we slide. This is now a race to the bottom. It's getting worse by the day. By the way, what the DCJ did, most Kenyans understood. Who doesn't get annoyed with, security officers when they stop you? I mean, You know, I mean, it looks fairly normal. But Kenyans said that this is a standard we are not willing to accept for somebody who's a state officer at that level. And by the way, I can imagine at that time, if what is happening today by members of parliament had happened, the outcry for something to happen would have been higher.
So
but
what
somehow we have continued to accept lower and lower standards.
Okay.
You know, and members of parliament are enjoying our accepting lower standards. So I think it's a conversation again that we need to have as a nation as to whether Chapter 6 means anything. Or whether we should just file it away and move on with our level of indiscipline.
Edwin, you had something
I think
to say?
the only distinction that I would draw between what happened with the DCJ and what is happening with members of parliament is that judicial officers have their own code of conduct. It's even an international code of conduct. There's certain behavior that judicial officers cannot engage in, and they are subjected to a different code. Actually, if you look at even the provisions of Chapter 6, we're supposed to, and the Leadership and Integrity Act, we are supposed to develop codes of conduct for all of these state officers. So for the judiciary, it is something that is even steeped in tradition, and it's quite international, so that you are held to a different standard. By the way, the removal of Nancy Baradha was not because of public outcry. It was because she was subjected by the Judicial Service Commission to the rules that apply to judges, and that is where she was found wanting. But if you have high expectations in our National Assembly, I think there's something wrong with you, because you know these people. You know these people. You should have nothing should surprise you when it comes to the Houses of Parliament. And I agree with my senior when he says that we have allowed this thing to grow. But you have to understand, where did this thing start? Because if you look at what Chapter 6 says, it says that every state officer must behave in a manner that shows respect for the people, shows respect to the Constitution and the rule of law. We have had, for instance, the Speaker of the House of the Parliament, and even the President himself has been accused of flouting the Constitution. He has been accused of, ignoring court orders. These are things that started with him. For instance, on the issue of, the land grab in Lamu, it was an obvious, usurpation of powers that the President did not have, powers that were reserved for the National Land Commission. We see Madam Gilu, the CS for Lands, fighting the, National Lands Commission every day, and no one makes any sound. So if a young member of parliament from Nandi Hills misbehaves, he knows that there is this culture that has been developed.
So this culture you're saying starts right at the top, the president?
Yes, it started from the top. And it even started with us, by electing people who had question marks on them.
Marco, do you what do you say to that before we move to Narok?
I think that's a fairly liberal outlook at what is happening. I think we as a people have tolerated bad behavior for a long time. We even excuse it, in fact. If you hear Sifuna's arguments, in fact, he's painting Keteri in very colorful light. Yeah, he's almost saying it's okay.
No, I'm saying Keteri is you and me. That's what I'm saying.
But he sits there. He sits there as a state officer. We don't sit. Yeah. At least as we, it's not every Kenyan. By the way, the reality is that there are different expectations for different, and I agree with you on the judiciary.
Yes. The
reality is the expectations of the judiciary is very, very high, even before Chapter 6.
Yes.
But you see, Kenyans' aspirations were that is the sort of leadership we would have.
Yeah.
Now, there are limits. By the way, there are certain things that members of parliament get away with, and we say, oh, well, on a balance of probabilities, okay. But what is happening now, it's getting lower and lower. And if members of parliament can get into a brawl in the house, stripping one another, pouring water on the speaker,
but
honestly,
senior, let me just challenge you on one thing.
Yes.
If, for instance, we take action on Keter and Wanga, like Makondingo has suggested, I can almost guarantee you that they will be re-elected, even if they're thrown out.
Which is fine. No. Which is fine.
So what does that say?
You see,
what does that say? If we are saying we are the people and we do not approve of this behavior,
then let's.
But they will be re-elected.
Then let us say. That's why I said, if we agree that we have a constitution that has a threshold, let's agree either because we can have a referendum and remove Chapter 6, which is fine. But for as long as that is a part of our constitution, we must hold leaders to account. Whichever way the public behaves, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, because also, Sifuna, you cannot surely be saying just because they're going to be re-elected, then don't do anything because anyway they're going to come back. At the end of the day, even aside from the re-election conversation, there just needs to be a general standard, even for your kids if you have kids. But you want to say something?
No. First of all, it's not true to say they'll be re-elected. The people, contrary to popular opinion held by a few of you, the people actually watching this behavior, and it is the people who are saying this is unacceptable. There are a lot of Kenyans out there. There's a critical mass of Kenyans who are saying this is unacceptable. You do not expect your leaders to solve their differences through Makofi and expect the normal Kenyan in Eastlands to dialogue when they have differences. We have to hold leaders accountable. There are 349 of them. They have access to regular access to media. They have regular. We shouldn't put a standard on anyone else. In fact, if Peter can walk into a weighbridge, he should have gone there and offered those officers help in terms of implementing the laws, in terms of seeking better ways of making better laws that can work for them. He goes there and says, we make these laws, we can break them. The man has never made a maiden speech in parliament. When is it he made any of these laws in this house? It is unacceptable. We have to put a stop to it. A governor slapped a woman rep. We excused it. We said she was crazy. Anybody would have done it. Yeah, we can't continue doing these things and hope that as a country we'll move forward in terms of leadership and integrity. We can.
Okay, let's move to Narok. 5 MPs arrested over the chaos there. Some lawyers crying foul. You have the Senator Ntutu and others. They were led to the CID headquarters for disturbances in which 2 people were killed. They were later locked up. And then you have also the control of budget faulting the arrangement in which money was being collected, and the arrangement between as well the county government and the private company. What do you make of this situation, Meganjo?
The reality is that we have some challenges in Narok, and that has been I think in the last 3 quarter reports from the control of budget, and even in the Auditor General's report, some issues, substantive issues were raised. And I think the people of Narok have every right to raise issues, and I think even to demonstrate on the issue, as long as they do it peacefully. And I think for me, the cancellation of the rally was probably ill-advised, unless there's an imminent threat of violence. If people are demonstrating against the elected leadership, it's all right. However, I think it's important also to recognize that the Constitution and the laws have also created processes by which you can challenge leaders, including, as we are seeing in Makueni, the possibility that you can actually send a whole county government home through the public process. You have institutions to which you can report if there's been fraud, there have been theft. And so there are also opportunities there where I don't think the only possible option is demonstrations. But having said that, demonstrations are legitimate. If the demonstrations are not violent, let people express themselves. We are in a new constitutional dispensation that we must allow people to express different views. Number 3 is that the level, when the police use live bullets on demonstrators, unless there's an imminent threat on the policeman, on the policeman's life and whatever, then there's also a problem there in terms of the way we understand how to manage people. And I think that again was a wrong application of police powers in terms of the use of live firearms.
Yeah.
I think that was unfortunate. But I think what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, let us allow people to express themselves as long as they're peaceful. Let us avoid using undue force. And I think we saw it in Langata. It's an indication of some of the attitudes that sometimes the police still have, despite a new phraseology in terms of a police service.
Yeah.
So I think that is something we need to work on. But finally, let us also try and use the opportunities that are there for challenging leaders who are misbehaving or who are misused resources.
Yeah. Edwin, do you think there should also be call for accountability from the police in this one? Because we're seeing a lot of focus on the leaders.
Yeah, I think what has happened is that when this constitution was being sold to Kenyans, it's as if it's only the Wananchi who understood what this constitution is about, because you see people exercising those rights in very bold ways. But what now needs to happen, I think, is civic education to these security forces, because they seem to be the only ones who do not understand, and even government officials who do not understand that people have all these rights that have been given unto themselves, and that they need to be allowed to exercise those rights peacefully. It is a trend that we have seen, like my senior mentioned the incident in Langata, and now the use of live bullets in Narok. It is ridiculous, and it started rightly, as he said, with the very ill-advised move by the cabinet secretary to try and ban the rally or the assembly.
Yeah.
Because you will see even in law, in the County Governments Act, members of the residents of an area have every right to take petitions to their governor on any issue. So they should just have been allowed to peacefully present their petition to their governor. And as he said, there are also other avenues. I don't know the intricacies of the internal politics in the county government in Narok, but maybe it appears that it is impossible to explore all those other avenues. For instance, for the removal of the governor through the county assembly, or even the dissolution of the entire county government, like happened in Makueni.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mark, your thoughts?
I know Narok fairly well. I spent some time in Narok last year on a study that went in a couple of counties, assessing the impact of devolution on peace and security. And Narok, the problem in Narok is not just that the leaders have a problem with accountability. There are clan dynamics, very heavy clan dynamics in Narok, in terms of the people who are in power, because the minority is in power in Narok, and that the majority is not very happy with that arrangement. So that is part of the problem, actually a huge part of the problem. There are people who accuse the governor of eating with the minority and leaving their community out, when it is their community that has controlled resources there for a long time. But secondly, there is the economy part. You go to Narok town and you talk to people in the service industry, they'll tell you hakuna pesa, siku hizi hakuna pesa, because apparently before the systems were tightened at the Mara, there were a lot of, every clerk had money, so there were a lot of people through whose hands money was flowing. So that money will then be taken to Narok, and the business will thrive in Narok quite substantially actually. When they tightened the noose around the revenue collection mechanisms in the Mara, originally with equity and then with caps, the money dried up. So you talk to businesses, they'll tell you there is very little money circulating. However, the money that is being collected is not seen as well by the people on the ground. I mean, in terms of development, in terms of roads. You get to Narok town, it's a dust heaven. You almost confuse it with parts of Northeastern, that are extremely dry. The roads are in pathetic shape. There isn't much being seen to be done. So there is a congruence of a lot of factors. The clan factors, the fact that there isn't money moving around, the fact that you've displaced the people who used to own the money, and of course the politics around it. Tunai comes from the smallest, in fact the smallest clan, amongst the Maasai in Narok. There are the problems, people are complaining about the fact that he has a deputy governor who doesn't exactly come from the Maasai community. So there are all those problems that I think need a better understanding and better handling in terms of conflict management. Because what is in Narok can get worse. It can get worse, especially given the other tribal and ethnic mathematics in and around the metropolitan areas that is Narok town. So we need to send, in fact, I actually think we need to send NCIC in, and a lot of the peace actors and the peace committees, to begin to have a conversation around and within the areas of conflict with the community leaders to solve some of these problems. It isn't something we are going to solve by shooting demonstrators or even jailing the members of parliament. It is something that will have to be solved through a peace, a peace system.
Okay. Kamatho, as the African Union Summit will be taking place, there's a move by the Kenyan delegation to lobby members to expand the mandate of the African Court of Justice, and this is in efforts to have Ruto's trial transferred back to the continent. What do you think about that?
Now, I'm one of those who believes in the need to expand the African Court of Justice mandate. I think it can only be good for the continent, because we obviously have unique challenges in terms of the enforcement of human rights in the continent, and I think a local mechanism would be useful. I think my only problem is there's a lot of hypocrisy in this question. The reality is that most African leaders, even if the African Court of Justice was there, would not use that mechanism for the sort of problems that the ICC was meant to solve. That is actually the reality. And so I would be very hesitant. Number two is that I'd like to see the commitment by the African leadership if they write a check for that court. As far as I know, even the AU is largely funded by foreign donors, as far as I know. Even the budget of the institutions that exist today are largely not funded by these countries. So for me, if they really are serious, and it would be good, I would like to see that court funded largely by this continent. A lot of these countries are actually in arrears. If you check, they're in terms of their subscriptions to most of the African institutions, they're in arrears. If a lot of donors pulled out, if the Belgians, the Germans, and whoever pulled out, a lot of these institutions would collapse. If they were to change that narrative, I'll take them seriously. Finally, the reality is this. One must understand why it is that most African countries signed on to the ICC in the beginning. Because we have very unique challenges in this continent. We are one of the few people who still massacre our people. You know, we always talk about, oh, George Bush was not, but George Bush was not killing Americans. Oh, Tony Blair, weapons of mass destruction. But if you look at the challenges in Africa, Joseph Kony massacres Ugandans. The challenges in Sudan is massacring Sudanese. In Nigeria, the Boko Haram is killing Nigerians. So in a sense, we have very unique human rights situations that probably sometimes in solutions outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, so, and that was the excitement on the ICC. The ICC has made some some blunders. I think there's many things they could have done differently. I think there's ways in which they have allowed the narrative about their targeting only Africans to grow, and there's sufficient evidence to support that narrative. But it's also not an entirely correct narrative, because if you look at who has taken most of the cases in the ICC, is actually African governments, including, like someone said, our next door neighbor, who is about to send a resolution to disband the ICC or at least Africa to pull out, but has just taken somebody there. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in that discussion. But in terms of growing the African court, I think it will be good for the continent. But that is not, by the way, in lieu of the ICC. I do not believe it's in lieu of the ICC. But there are certain unique things that the African court would be able to deal with.
Okay, Sifuna, your thoughts on Murkomen calls for the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga to actually testify, be a witness for DP, saying that they were in the same team. Who better than the person who was on the presidential ballot to come and say, he knows what this man stood for, he campaigned for me, all these things he's being accused of is not what ODM was about?
Well, at this particular at this particular stage, it would be quite interesting that somebody of Murkomen's stature, who is an advocate, who knows that if there's any person who's available for the defense of the DP, it is for the DP's defense team to make arrangements and avail him in the court in The Hague to be able to defend the DP there. But the truth of the matter is that his statement was political, and it was even mischievous, because there has been this narrative that developed during the last election, especially in Rift Valley, that it is a prime minister who was responsible, former prime minister who was responsible for taking the cases to The Hague. When the truth couldn't, the truth of the matter is that is one of the greatest lies that we've ever been told in this country. We know that this process went through, the entire system, including the Houses of Parliament, and the Hansard is very clear on who voted to take these cases to the ICC. So his statement was a little bit mischievous, and I know it was meant to, he has his own beef with the Prime Minister, and I am sure he was just poking the Prime Minister to see, to get a reaction out of him.
Yeah, but Mark Odinga, wouldn't you say, I mean, they were in the same team, he'd make the best defense in as far as now the defense team for Ruto putting together their witnesses as their time comes to make submissions in court. Wouldn't he be one of the best bet for them?
I have said as much on my Twitter page. I think it will be, politically, it will be a political masterstroke by Raila, by the way. Yeah, go to the ICC. He's been saying that, if you are innocent, go and prove your innocence there. Ruto was with him. In fact, Ruto significantly contributed to Raila's votes in 2007. Yeah, I suspect Raila would have gotten less than half the votes he got if Ruto wasn't there. He was the most energetic person in that campaign. He went around the country campaigning for him. He was with him throughout in Nairobi during the post-election violence. Yeah, I think Raila will be the best defense witness Ruto can get. Let Raila go to The Hague. Let him speak on behalf of his former deputy party leader. Defend him. Say the things he knows. If anyone knows Ruto's involvement or lack of it during post-election violence, is Raila Odinga. I think he should.
What I can only say
I think Ruto's people, Ruto's people have a right to ask, to ask for Raila to go and defend them. The political shenanigans notwithstanding. I know, there were a lot of accusations and counter-accusations about who to The Hague, but that was politics. Ruto wanted power, and Raila would have done the same thing if he wanted power and he thought it would benefit him. So the politics is over. His friend is on the dock. his life is at stake, let him go and defend him.
Well, what I can only say is this use of a word, he was with him. You know, when the court was...
He was actually throughout.
You see, if we are together planning a campaign and then you are accused of planning violence, those are two separate things. If these people were together when they were planning violence, as the accusations go, Raila Odinga would be an indictee, because they would be co-perpetrators of that particular.
Yeah, although there's a report that said that was indicting, is it, I think Hassan Omar Kiai, that they removed some of the evidence that would have pointed towards Raila in as far as getting Ruto on the dock is concerned.
Well, those are allegations that have just been made against members of the civil society.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that if you look at the indictment, yeah, if these people were together, if we participated in planning violence together, we would be in the dock together. And if you are asking that somebody who you planned violence with come and testify against you, what is the value of that person's evidence?
I'm not sure that to bring in Kamotho on this political one.
I think the reality is that the political optics are what is more interesting. I think if the defense team, yes, Karim Khan and the rest, felt that the Prime Minister was a good witness, I can guarantee you he would have been caught long ago. Yeah. This is political optics, and I think they're useful. I think Daktari here says that it would help the former Prime Minister's profile in the Rift Valley.
It wouldn't.
You know, I don't know, but I think it's more a political issue than a technical legal issue as to the fact that he can be called as a credible witness. I am not sure that the team intends to call him at a technical level as a witness. I don't believe so myself.
Let's move on to teachers' issues. And you have Sosion, the NAT Secretary General, being summoned by the CID for questioning over incitement. He's accused of inciting the teachers not to go back to northeastern Kenya. We've seen some of those protests, and now the TSC has come out to say if you don't go back, you don't have a job. What do you make of this, Edwin? Do you think NAT is playing to the gallery with this particular issue, that there's something else behind what we see or hear?
No. I don't think there's any element of incitement in this particular matter, because if you saw the images that we saw in the Mandera massacre, and that majority of the people who were killed in that particular incident were teachers. These were colleagues, these are friends, these are people they worked with. It is extremely traumatizing that you are being asked to go back to that particular area, and yet nobody is giving any assurances of what has changed on the ground. Yeah, so it is hypocritical for you to say, let these people go, and you are saying that in the comfort of your house in Nairobi. You are not the one who's going there. Yeah, this is a group that is extremely traumatized given the events that happened in Mandera, and unless government has given assurances on what steps it has taken to secure their own workers in Mandera, in other areas in Northeastern, then they are justified in refusing to go. And by the way, security is not the only issue that the teachers in Northeastern have raised. They have raised a number of issues, including even harassment by the local people, yeah, and even the way they are treated by the community themselves, even by their own students. So all these things are factors, and instead of the government addressing what their concerns are, they have decided to summon Sosion allegedly on incitement charges.
A doctor was killed in Peketoni. Yeah, in fact, he was killed on the day he reported to work during the Peketoni attacks. Yeah. You didn't see the doctors' union coming up and telling all doctors to come out, to get out of Peketoni, because now it was dangerous for them to be there. As a country, we already struggling with cohesion. Yeah, we are a deeply divided nation. The last thing we want is to send civil servants to places where they are locals, because then we'll end up with a country that will turn northeastern, yeah, or the northern parts of Kenya into a Sharia state, because Christians fear that they might be attacked in those places. I think teachers have legitimate concerns, especially these particular teachers, and especially the teachers that live along the Kenya-Somalia border, that teach along the Kenya-Somalia border. They have legitimate concerns over security. Yeah, I know the national government has put quite a lot in place in terms of dealing with insecurity in northern Kenya.
But have they communicated the same? We're not seeing that. We're not seeing any reassurances coming through.
Yeah, they have done sufficiently enough.
What are those things they've done?
But what they have done does not guarantee that something like that will not happen. So when a teacher says they have legitimate concerns over their working in Mandera, they should be taken seriously. However, I think we have had a failure at different levels of the system. These teachers either witnessed their colleagues being massacred, or they have colleagues that they know are massacred. It is very difficult for a human being to recover from something like that. What mechanisms have we put in place in terms of psychosocial support to support these teachers? Why NAT, for example, collects billions of shillings to protect teachers' welfare. Why is it they couldn't hire psychotherapists for these teachers and put them in psychotherapy for the next 3 months to just help them recover from this? But I think the county government and the people of Mandera and North Eastern are also not doing enough. Yeah, I think the county government of Mandera, for example, has quite significant funds. And I don't see why it will be difficult to put fabricated houses in the schools that border the Somalia, for example, so that then when you're offering security to the school, that security extends to the teachers as well. Because their complaint is, there is security in the school, yes, but we are not secure where we live. Yeah, and that is a concern. And you've had concerns about them being charged 5,000 shillings and a local teacher is charged 1,500 shillings. The county government should be more proactive, yeah, and do something about that, and you know, offer some form of housing within areas that you can easily offer security for. Yeah, but issuing tweets and issuing press conferences and hoping that will assure them of security doesn't help. If it could help, Kimayo and Lenku will still be in office.
All right, let's hear from Kamoda on the thing.
One, I think, you know, Sosion is a union leader. He sits there to protect the interest of his members. So I would be surprised if on an issue like this, he doesn't take a strong position. We may disagree with him, but that is what he earns his salary for. So I think unless you can show that he's inciting to violence, I mean, there's nothing wrong with him telling the teachers if they have challenges, they shouldn't go. I mean, it's not unlawful. But I think, you know, it would be a very responsible government that actually admits that it's no longer able to guarantee the security of, the security of its workers, and so therefore let's move you away from there. Because then you have effectively surrendered that part. You no longer have jurisdiction over that area. And so I think anyone who expects government to say, oh, I'm so sorry, if that is the way it is, then you can't go, I think is very naive. Government can't do that. And remember, it's not just teachers. If today teachers pull out, and government allows them to pull out, what happens to the other public servants? You know, the other public servants have a legitimate claim to say, no. What does that do to Northeastern Province? Is that good for the country? And Northeastern is a legitimate part of this country. Now, does that mean the government has done all it can? No. I think this is the sort of issue that you don't treat the teachers as a problem, you know, which needs to be dealt with. They have legitimate concerns that are not just about the issues they are raising. A lot of these actually require therapy, you know. And remember, they have worked in very difficult environments for a very long time. The government needs to be seen to go out of its way, way out of its way, to ensure that you're recognizing their very special concerns. And whatever it takes in terms of investments, you invest. Because if you fail on the teachers, you have actually failed on other public servants, and you have actually ceded control over that area. So I think it's important that this should be taken a lot more seriously. But the solution is not to move the teachers out or any other public servants out. No, that cannot be the solution.
What I would be interested to hear from my senior is what the CIC has done as far as, you know, the Constitution created an equalization fund, essentially to help these areas come up to speed and, you know, present at least the same infrastructure and lifestyle as the rest of us here in Nairobi and the other areas. Where are we on that fund?
I'll tell you two things, Wakili. One is that if you look at the allocation of resources, leave alone the equalization fund, which is only 0.5% of the, it's very little. It's about 4 billion shillings. If you look at the allocation of funding on the basis of the formula, the reality is it unduly gives advantage to those areas. If you look at the allocation for Turkana this time, I think it's about 11 billion, almost the same as Nairobi. You know, the reality is that our revenue distribution system is structured to ensure that those areas that have suffered over time get advantage. The equalization fund has a problem because the regulations are not in place. And that's because, by the way, members of parliament want to control it. So they have refused to pass the regulations. They're trying a constitutional amendment. That's another story. But even with the funds that are there, I think the county governments, and I agree with Dr. the county governments have a huge responsibility to deal particularly with those soft issues which will ensure that they don't continue being marginalized. Because if this thing succeeds, what will happen is that you will end up having no doctors in Northeastern, no nurses other than locals. And by the way, some of the locals also don't want to be there for their own reasons, for advancement. So in a sense, the county governments have a huge responsibility to utilize funds proactively to deal with the soft issues. Unfortunately, if you look at the report that came from the Treasury yesterday on the disbursement and the utilization of money, you look at who is not absorbing money. And you see, maybe for sometimes it's reasons of structure and all that, But I think one of the saddest things is some of the counties that have really suffered past marginalization are also the ones that are either misusing money or not utilizing it. So a lot of work needs to be done there by the leadership.
Okay, before we wrap up, I know we're going to talk about the arbitration center as we wind up, but one more issue. The 4 months election, Mark, I'll ask you about this. Students, parents, hue and cry, especially from private schools, performed very well, excellent A's, and they get not even an extra county school placement. Others from one primary school, all of them getting batched into the same secondary school. Mystery has been claimed to be surrounding this whole 4 months election. The CS Education comes out and says, no, everything is happening as it should. Do you believe it is?
I fundamentally have a problem with the idea that if you get 440 marks, you should go to Alliance. If you get 150 marks, you should go to Nyakemincha Secondary School. I have a problem with that arrangement.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me tell you about myself. I got 405 marks out of 700 back then.
And you say?
Yeah.
That was out of 700.
No, out of 700.
Oh,
I failed.
Yeah, that was a long time
that
ago.
was a long time.
In this exam, I would have gotten 282 marks.
Yes.
You know the way they say there is a calling letter? I never even got one. Yeah, because really my marks were extremely low. Yeah, but it was because of circumstances beyond my control. Really, I went to my village school, which had 3 teachers. Half of my school life, I was sitting on a stone and learning under a tree. Yeah, and half of the time I was supposed to go to school, I didn't go to school because of other reasons. I managed to get some, private school in Webuye that has since been closed, in fact. So I suspect one of these days when I'm running for governor, someone may claim that I didn't even go to high school. But I used the resources that I found there. There were teachers, there were 10 teachers. I used the resources that I found there to actually work hard and got straight A's and made it to the university. My point is that a bright student just needs teachers and basic facilities to actually make it. The notion that you must go to Alliance to make it, to become a doctor, is ridiculous. Yeah, I think it's unfair, but a lot of the problems that we're facing, I saw a newspaper article yesterday in the Nation that quoted some very remote primary schools in the villages where a student got 411, 420. What is happening is parents whose children spent their entire lives in private schools have figured out a way to cheat the system. Yeah, they have realized that if you took your child to Koga Primary School, which is my village school, and they are bright enough and they get 440 marks, they stand a better chance of going to Alliance than if they remained in Makini and were number 40 in their class. So the child learns their entire life in Makini, then they enrolled in Koga Primary School. So you'll find that in that school that had a pupil that had 420 marks, the next pupil had 225. I mean, when they're doing selections, these are some of the things that they must consider. So if you made deliberate efforts to cheat the system will know. It will know, it will note it, but I think the solution...
So you don't think the system is flawed? You just think people need to work with what they have?
No, I think the system needs to be abandoned altogether. My ideal situation would be that every primary school has a high school, so that there's seamless transition from class 8 to Form 1 for every pupil that does exams. Today, we have nearly 400,000 pupils doing class 8 and never getting opportunities to go to Form 1. It's unacceptable.
Okay.
Yeah, so ideally, we really should have you going to Koga Primary School, Koga Secondary School, then let's
Koga
look at the differentiation from Form 4.
Koga University, Koga Company and the co-associates. What do you think about this, Edwin?
Well, I am a beneficiary of public schooling. I went to public school all my life, and the truth of the matter is that this system used to work. Public schools used to work, and he's not alone. Many Kenyans share that story. We learned in some very rudimentary institutions, but the truth of the matter is that if the student is focused and just given the minimum that used to be there, then you have a chance at success. But what I don't understand is there is a point at which we decided as a country that we were going to commercialize education, that it became very attractive for you to, pass examinations, especially at the primary level. Because I remember when we were in school, private school used to be for people who had failed or not performed very well, as my brother has just put it. But somehow we got to a place where we commercialized education, and now these private schools started coming up, primary private schools, that would have 100 students scoring over 400 marks, and all of them would have to, squeeze into Alliance High School. And you see that the resources that are committed to these particular private institutions are not the same as the resources that are available for those public schools. And it is not for us to vilify the private schools or the private institutions, but it is for us to raise the standards that are in our public schools, so that at the end of the day, the children in public schools and private schools are competing on an even level. Then when the results come out, you have an easier selection model. There are countries in this world where public schooling is still much better than private schooling, and it is because of investment by the governments in those countries in public education.
Briefly, Kamodo, on this issue of someone's selection?
I think we need a lot more transparency in the system. I think the reality is, I would not be as nihilistic as my good friend and say let's abandon the system. We haven't abandoned it yet. I think the points it makes are legitimate. I think we need a total overhaul of our education system. It's not just about the selection. But in the meantime, when we have this system, let it be transparent, because there are many ways in which it doesn't make sense. If you have only, I think they talk about 17,000 places available for national and county schools, you had 5,000 students with the 5,000 marks and above. I'm surprised that there are students with less than 400 who are not in a national and county school. Whatever the reason, whether they moved schools or whatever, it doesn't make sense. But the reality is, the bigger problem is that we are creating a very stratified country, where my child starts out school in a private primary, kindergarten, preschool, whatever, baby school, goes on to private primary school, private secondary school, private university, and moves on to the job sector. The children of the poor, where 70%, 80% of the students are, and who are performing very poorly, actually will never get to interact with my children. And so we're also creating a very and unfortunately my children will also have the benefits of the better jobs, the better opportunities, and we're not creating, so in a sense we need to ask very real questions. Many of us, those of us in leadership, are actually beneficiaries of the public school system. Most of us, if the system was there today, would not have afforded private schools, which means we'd be struggling. So we have fundamental questions to ask about the sort of country we want. All
right, finally, I have only 2 minutes, so very quickly, Edwin Sifuna, I know this is an issue you're very passionate about, the arbitration center, some controversy around that. You had moved to court. Where are you at now?
Well, where we are at now is we were given court orders by Justice Mumbi Ngugi, who said that members of the Law Society of Kenya don't have to pay for the arbitration center project for them to be given practicing certificates. And some members gave notice to the Law Society of Kenya, notices of motions to be included in the AGM for the removal of the entire council in the manner in which they have conducted themselves, and even the current chair and vice chair. So we are waiting for those notices to be out, because the council is legally bound to include those motions that have been requested by the members. And we are hoping that it is not just a small group of people talking to themselves. We believe that the membership is with us. I don't know if my senior is with us, because if you look at historically the role that the Law Society of Kenya has played in this country, when we are accusing all these other institutions of failing to uphold the constitution and hold the government to account, it has always been the last bastion that Kenyans can always look towards the Law Society of Kenya to be able to articulate some of these issues and defend the public. But if we ourselves, as the Law Society of Kenya, have problems with transparency and the manner in which we deal with our people, we do not even understand the concept of servant leadership. If you are there as an elected member or as an elected representative, your work is to listen to the people, not to tell the people what to do. So we would like an opportunity to reintroduce that concept in the Law Society of Kenya by getting in people who understand what servant leadership means.
I don't know why you're laughing.
He's campaigning.
I'm not campaigning. I was asked a question.
What do you think, though, of this arbitration center issue?
I think the people who have gone to court have legitimate issues. I think if they raise issues about accountability, if there is issues about public participation and whether there was sufficient consultation, I am with them. Why I completely disagree with them is where they say they don't want to pay money because they will not have a stake in that building. That is where we part ways. Because listen, we paid money. I paid money for the Law Society Center. We paid good money. A lot of the new members are benefiting from that center. They didn't pay anything. The reality is there are certain things you invest for the good of your society. And so I would like the conversation to go as to whether we have a piece of land we were given by government many years ago, which we have never utilized, and for which we pay rates and land rent every year. We need to, develop that property. Let the conversation be about the options that are there, but not that we must own ourselves. We must have a piece of that if we're going to contribute. By the way, even the amount of money we're talking about, like I always say, it's 1,000 bob a month over 3 years. I suspect the average lawyer spends that on a good evening at...
it's easy for senior to say.
No, but it's true.
Money.
But it's true.
But
no,
you need to look at the society in its entirety.
No, by the way, even when I was a young lawyer, we were paying the same kind of money to buy that center. So it's not about wealth. It's about saying the society has given a lot to you. The Law Society is the one that fights for lawyers to have a monopoly of legal services. It is very little to ask young lawyers to be able to also put in something in the society.
What you have not gotten is the fact that the people who raised the objection are not opposed to the building of the arbitration center.
Yes.
What we are saying is that before you tell me to contribute, you have a responsibility to tell me everything about this particular project.
And on that one I agree.
And that is a problem we have. Do you know, senior, that it took a court order for us to be given documents on the project? Why we did take a court order for you to share with your own membership.
That's true.
On the project proposals and everything. Even as today, as we speak here, we do not even have a bill of quantities for that project. Yet we are negotiating with banks. How did they come up with this figure that you're talking about, 1 shilling per year?
My director says we really must end this there. So Edwin Sifuna, advocate, thank you so much for joining us. Kamodo Weganjo, Commission of the Implementation of the Constitution Commissioner, and the one and only Dr.
You
Washington.
need to keep saying, I won't be called that for a long time. I only have 10 months.
Yes,
oh,
please.
yeah?
Are you campaigning?
No. We have said we are not seeking an extension.
No extension.
Yeah.
So we need to have you more often than on the show so I can say that more and more. Dr. Washington Marco Dingo, political analyst, future political aspirant, even Kajiado Central. Maybe it's not too late. Thank you all for joining us.
I could be the TNA candidate, by the way.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. That is the State of the Nation. I'll be sampling some of your thoughts later on the show, on some of what you've had to say on our discussion this morning. Coming up is Michael Gitonga, who'll be talking about job hunting. So yeah, unemployment levels in the country are crazy. So if you're out there looking for a job, Michael will be helping you on how to set yourself up best to ensure when you go for that interview, you ace it. Stay with us.